Okay, so what we're going to do now is we are going to go into a PowerPoint presentation that's going to give us a little bit more information about the War of 1812. Here we go. All right, so let's get into some history about the War of 1812. So now, here, let me do this again. 3, 2, 1. All right, let me write that down. I'm going to cut out. Cut. Start of PPT. All right, 3, 2, 1. Okay, so let's get into some history about the War of 1812. But before we actually talk about the war, we're going to back up a little bit. Now, the end of the Revolutionary War, when we were fighting England, or also known as the British or Britain, that kind of stuff, they had signed a treaty with us to end the war in 1783. Now, from that point, America was its own independent country. With the treaty, the British agreed to give up all of their forts that they had developed along the edge of the 13 colonies that were at that time was preventing people from doing westward expansion without specific permission from the British government. They agreed to give up their forts so that our settlers could begin to move out west. Okay. Now, at the same time they were finishing up their war with us in the Revolutionary War, and things were starting to get a little tense about to kick off the War of 1812, the British were also fighting a little pipsqueak from France known as Napoleon. Now, we didn't have too much of a problem with Napoleon because Napoleon was supportive of Americans having their independence from England. Okay, as we talked about last week in our discussion of the Revolutionary War, a weaker England actually worked in France's benefit. So if they lost all these colonies over here in the Americas, that would create a weaker England, okay? All right, so now Napoleon, though, after the Revolutionary War, had kind of grown a little bit of a big head and decided that he wanted to basically conquer all of Europe. So while the British are dealing with us and Napoleon, they're kind of stuck in the middle, so they're unable to focus all of their forces on us at that time, okay? All right, now, in order to keep their forces strong after the American Revolutionary War, while they were fighting Napoleon, they began a process called imprisonment. Now, imprisonment is basically they would stop an American ship by threat of force and board the ship and then take American sailors as prisoners and force them to fight on British ships. Now, as you can imagine, this made us a little upset. Now, the British also went back on their word for what they had signed in the treaty and decided that they were not going to give the forts back to us here in America. And it was causing problems as our settlers were trying to move out west. They were being stopped and a lot of times being locked up. So it was causing kind of an issue. And you can imagine that made us even madder. And to top that all off, the British also encouraged the Native Americans to savagely fight Americans and attack towns and innocent people, women and children. And they even gave them arms and money to do this. And that has really got under our skin. Now, like England, a lot of other countries did not think that we could protect ourselves. And shipping was extremely important to the early Americas. Business was dependent upon shipping our goods to other countries. Those that were involved in this sea trade didn't want us to go to war against England again because they knew that England would retaliate and take it out on their ships. Okay? Now, fortunately, though, we were blessed to have an amazing American president at that time, President James Madison. His nickname was Little Jeremy. And he asked Congress to declare war on England in 1812. Now, a lot of them were very hesitant about doing that because of all the reasons that we mentioned a little while ago. But he finally was able to convince them, and Congress signed on, and the war began. Little side note about Madison. Madison was a small man. He's only about 5 feet 4 inches tall, 120 pounds. So a little bitty guy, but he was extremely intelligent and very often underestimated by many of those around him, okay? Now, the Americas, to kick off this War of 1812, one of the things they did is they invaded Canada, which at that time was still a British colony. They hoped to conquer this British territory and take it for their own. Obviously, with the fact that Canada is still Canada and we're not taking them in right now, means that we didn't exactly win this fight. The Indians joined the British and the Americans were so not prepared for the battle. The Americans burned the Parliament building in York, which is a town we now call Toronto, and they retreated. So basically they came, they saw, they burned, they ran. So that didn't turn out too well for them. Now, at the same time when there were these problems over here happening with the British finally defeated Napoleon at the Battle of Waterloo. This left them free to concentrate on their war with us. This was not a good thing because they came in full force, the largest, most professional group of soldiers and sailors in the world. And that's no exaggeration. They sailed toward America. Because remember, we were still young, a very young country at the time. Now, there were also battles going on the water. There was one battle happening on the water, and I'm actually going to come out of the screen share just for a second. Well, I'm going to stay in screen share, but I'm going to come out of the PowerPoint for just a second while I talk. There was a battle that took place in the Atlantic Ocean. Between two ships, the American ship known as the USS, that's Lake Erie, known as the USS Constitution, and another ship, make sure I have it here, known as the HMS, gosh, it starts with a G. I can't think of the name. Let me see if it says it here. It does not. Oh, there it is. Jore, I think is how you pronounce it. I'm not 100% sure on that. Hey, they're going to say it in the video. But the USS Constitution is one of the oldest ships that is still in use here in America. Okay, now this video put together by the U.S. Navy is going to give you a little bit more information about that. So listen up. Here we go.
USS Constitution was launched in 1797 to protect American shipping. The ship was constructed of sturdy live oak, white oak, red cedar, and pitch pine. She is 207 feet from billet head to taffrail and 43.5 feet at her widest section. She was designed to carry 44 guns, but almost always carried more. In the War of 1812, Constitution was one of only a few U.S. Navy frigates, but was also of larger than average size, allowing her to carry more and heavier guns than her adversaries. In August 1812, Constitution met the British warship HMS Guerriere in the Atlantic. Captain Isaac Hall, in command of Constitution, brought his ship within 25 yards of Guerriere, blasting the enemy at point-blank range. The two ships locked together in a tangle of rigging as they traded cannon fire. When they separated, Constitution sailed ahead while Guerriere's weakened fore and mainmasts fell, leaving the ship dead in the water. Unable to continue the fight, the British surrendered. During the battle, Guerriere's shot failed to always penetrate Constitution's sturdy hull, earning her the enduring nickname Old Ironsides. Constitution would encounter other British warships during the war, and each time emerged victorious. Though her battles didn't have much effect on the outcome of the war, her victories against the Royal Navy were a source of inspiration to Americans. Constitution remained an active warship until the 1850s, when she began a new role as a training ship for midshipmen, a valuable service she filled for another 3 decades. Today, Old Ironsides remains the oldest commissioned warship afloat in the world and America's ship of state, and is berthed in Boston Harbor. The average annual visitation is 500,000 national and international visitors. The U.S. Navy is responsible for annual repairs and periodic restorations, with a mission to bring the ship back to her 1812 configuration as far as practicable. USS Constitution, a reminder of the proud and lasting legacy of the United States Navy.
Okay, so that gives you a little bit of an idea of one thing that was going on the waterways, but there was also other battles that were actually happening on the Great Lakes, which if you got your colonies going down the eastern seaboard along the Atlantic Ocean, where all the colonies were at the time, the Great Lakes bordered right onto those colonies right in that area, and there were battles going on between the Americans and the British in those. Now, one of the battles, probably the first battle that took place, the battle we just talked about took place in 1812. It was August 19th of 1812. This one was over a year later, and one of the other major battles that we won in our second war against Britain. That was the Battle of Lake Erie, sometimes called the Battle of Put-in-Bay. I know it's kind of a funny name. It was fought in September of 1813, and you can see some pictures here of the actual bay coming off of the Great Lake. Now, 9 American ships had captured 6 British ships, which gave the Americans control of that very important lake for the rest of the war. Okay, now the guy that led this battle was Commodore Oliver Hazard Perry. He supervised the American fleet, and he was said to have actually had this particular flag on his ship. Now, this is definitely words to live by in anything that you do. Don't give up the ship. And we could take that as, don't give up your dreams. Don't give up learning something new. Don't give up this. Don't give up that. But in their instance, they could not afford to lose this battle against the British. So no matter what, they could not give up that ship. It was one of the biggest naval battles of the War of 1812. Interestingly enough, it occurred on a lake and not in the ocean. Now, this is a museum that's actually on Lake Erie that depicts the battle of Oliver Hazard Perry and the other against the British ships. Now, after all that, to get revenge for the burning of York in Canada, the British decided to attack the city of Washington, D.C. Now, remember, D.C., for those who don't know, stands for District of Columbia. It is a district, it is a city, but it's not part of a state. It's not part of Maryland, it's not part of New York, it's not part of any state around it. Its own little entity because it is our federal capital, okay? Now, thinking that the British might be on their way to Washington, President Madison and other political military leaders were forced to leave town. You have to protect the president and other leaders at all costs, so they were forced to leave. Now, his wife was a little bit more stubborn. Dolly Madison, the president's wife, remained behind because she, among many others, truly believed that the British would not attack Washington. Now, the British did, unfortunately. They focused all their energy on Washington and attacked ferociously. First thing they did was burn the Capitol building. They destroyed all the books in the Library of Congress. Then they headed toward the president's house. Now, to the people of Washington, they watched in horror as the British Army basically destroyed their capital. A lot of American civilians were killed, and the British lost very few soldiers. When they were headed to the president's house at that time, when Dolly received word that they were on their way, she was actually preparing to give a dinner party. Because back in that time period, there weren't exactly text messaging like, hey, you need to get out, the British are coming. No, it's none of that. Sometimes it took a minute for the word to get to where you were, and the fight could have been going on over here, and she might not have known about it. But Dolly did run for her life, of course, but only after she heroically managed to save many important historical items from the president's home, including a large portrait of George Washington, some velvet curtains, and some extremely important papers. Now, that's a picture of Dolly Madison down there at the bottom, and this is the painting that was painted in 1799 of our first president, George Washington. This is a letter that she wrote depicting that evening and what had happened. So I'm going to read this to you real quick. Our kind friend, Mr. Carroll, has come to hasten my departure and is in a very bad humor with me because I insist upon waiting until the large picture of General Washington is secure, and it requires to be unscrewed from the wall. This process was found to be too tedious for these perilous moments. I have ordered the frame to be broken and the canvas taken out. It is done, and the precious portrait placed in the hands of 2 gentlemen of New York for safekeeping. Dolly Madison. Okay, and you can see it is still in the White House to this day, and this is a picture of one of our presidents with the painting behind him, as it's still there to this day. Now, to add insult to injury, before they actually burned the president's home, they sat down and ate the dinner that she had prepared for her guests, and then set fire to the home and left. completely destroying the president's home. As fate would have it, there's no way that the British or the Americans know that an actual rain and wind hurricane was on its way to Washington, D.C. It was coming up the East Coast. To the civilians of Washington, it seemed as if the hand of God itself had reached out to punish the British for what they had done to their beautiful capital. The hurricane hit, some tornadoes even touched down, and many lost their lives. Unfortunately, Washington was in ruins. This is a painting done of the Battle of Washington. So much chaos. It's just crazy. Now, this is where we're going to start next week with the British on their way to Baltimore. Now, keep in mind, we're just hitting the highlights in what happened in the War of 1812, okay? I do want to backtrack a little bit, though. I meant to talk about this earlier when we were talking about the battles, the naval battles. So I'm going to back it up. So sailors on these kind of ships would very often sing a type of song called sea shanty. Now, sea shanties were very much like work songs for people who worked on boats. What they would do is you would have a guy called a shantyman, and the shantyman would be one that had a very loud, powerful voice and be able to sing these phrases, after which the other sailors would respond. And this is a way to keep everybody working in time with each other. If they were hauling up the ropes onto the ship to pull the anchor up, or pulling the ropes to let the masts out of these massive ships, this is the type of songs that they would be singing. So I'm going to move over back into my internet, and we are going to talk about one of these particular sea shanties that became really, really popular right around this time period. So our soldiers and sailors on these ships would have been probably singing it during the War of 1812, called Roll the Old Chariot, okay? Now, this is a African-American melody that so many loved because it's absolutely so beautiful that people have taken and they've been able to create all kinds of new songs with them because it is such a beautiful, beautiful melody. So we are going to pull this full screen. Now, this is a guy named David Coffin up around the Great Lake area, and he is going to sing with his very powerful voice, Roll the Old Chariot for you guys. Here we go. This is a maritime folk festival. So, oh, my bad, it's in New Hampshire. My apologies. It is in the Northeast, but not around the Great Lake area. It's New Hampshire. Okay, so just listen up. This is a really, really cool song.
Oh, we'd be all right if the wind was in our sails. So we'd be all right if the wind was in our sails. So we'd be all right if the wind was in our sails. And we'll all hang on behind, and we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along, and we'll all hang on behind. Oh, it'd be all right if we make it around the Horn. Oh, it'd be all right if we make it around the Horn. Oh, it'd be all right if we make it around the Horn.
So I don't know if you heard me saying that because the video can get kind of loud, but he would be the shantyman and giving out the first part of the song, and then everybody else would respond.
And we'll all hang on behind, and we'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along. We'll roll the old chariot along, and we'll all hang on behind. Well, a night on the town wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, a night on the town wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, a night on the town wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all hang on behind, and we'll roll the old chariot along.
Yeah, just imagine the sailors as the shantyman and themselves are going through this song, keeping in time, pulling the ropes with the beat of the music. And that's really what it was for, is to keep everybody together.
We'll roll the old festival wouldn't do us any harm. Oh, another festival.
Now that line he added on its own, that's not an original one to the song, but because it's at a festival, and that's a lot of times that's what the shantyman would do. The shantyman was a great at improvising, meaning being able to make something up on the fly. So he's doing exactly what a shantyman would do.
Festival wouldn't do us any harm. Whoa, another festival wouldn't do us any harm. And we'll all hang on behind. And we'll roll the old. We'll roll the old. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all hang on behind. And we'll roll the old. We'll roll the old. We'll roll the old chariot along. And we'll all hang on behind.
That was pretty good, wasn't it? Yeah, he's very energetic, and the shantyman had to be very energetic when they were doing these songs in order to get the sailors energetic as well. So like I said, next time we're going to start with the British in their battle on Baltimore and how that turned out, and another very important song that came out during this time period. So what you need to do now is go take your quiz. You can either do it by clicking the link in the description below this video if you're watching this on YouTube. If you're watching this on Schoology, you can go all the way down to the bottom and you'll see the quiz embedded there. Or you can go back over to my website and click the link for the quiz there. No matter how you get there, make sure you go and take that quiz, okay? So I will see you guys next week. Bye.